Hello, good morning, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay, in for your host, Ladia Keduale. Today, the headlines. Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of war crimes in Luhansk village of Mavivka. UN nuclear watchdog says no immediate safety concerns at Zaporizhzhia plant after latest shelling. And Moldova warns of acute crisis as powers pledge more support. The Kremlin says it'll bring to justice those responsible for the alleged execution of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine, and that it will do everything possible to draw attention to what is called a war crime. Russia last week accused Ukrainian soldiers of executing more than 10 Russian prisoners of war, citing a video circulating on Russian social media. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, says there is no doubt that Russia itself will be looking for the perpetrators of this crime. They must be found and punished. Now, Ukraine's Commission of Human Rights dismissed the Russian accusation on Sunday. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says Russia has to stop shelling Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after it was rocked by shelling on Sunday. The shelling drew condemnation from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which says such attacks risked a major disaster. This comes after Russia and Ukraine on Monday traded blame for at least a dozen explosions at the nuclear power station.
Сьогодні з президентом Франції Еммануелем Макроном фактично про реалізацію одразу
Today, I spoke with French President Emmanuel Macron about, in fact, implementing several points of our peace formula at once, namely about radiation safety and the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, about radiation safety and the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as well as about the energy security of Ukraine and Europe. We are working to ensure the implementation of the IAEA's order to stop any hostile activity against Ukrainian nuclear objects. And for this, the demilitarization of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is extremely important. Russia must withdraw all its fighters and stop shelling the power plants. I thank President Macron for this readiness to support the protection of our energy objects. We are also doing everything to make the conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine and the implementation of a fast recovery plan, in which France is ready to show leadership as effective as possible.
Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky. In the meantime, his French counterpart, President Emmanuel Macron, says he's held an urgent call with his Ukrainian counterpart, Vladimir Zelensky, about the security situation at the nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia. Macron informed Zelensky of his deep concern following recent strikes in and around the site, according to a readout of the call. Mr. Macron told reporters on Monday that a threat still hangs over the plant. According to the Élysée Palace, the French president also spoke with the chief of International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, to discuss the plant and the pursuit of the demilitarization of the site. Meanwhile, a team of independent inspectors from the UN nuclear watchdog have reported no immediate nuclear safety or security concerns at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after shelling over the weekend. According to an official statement, International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Director General Rafael Grossi says the team assessed the damage to the site on Monday and concluded that despite the severity of the shelling, key equipment remains intact. The statement adds that all 6 reactors at Europe's largest nuclear power plant are stable, and the team confirmed the integrity of the fuel and radioactive waste in their storage facilities. However, widespread damage was still observed at the site, it says, which maintenance staff have already begun to repair. Grossi describes the damage as a major cause of concern, as it clearly demonstrates the sheer intensity of the attacks. Staying with the nuclear power station, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky urges NATO members to guarantee the protection of the country's nuclear plants from Russian sabotage a day after the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia plant was rocked by heavy shelling. In a video address to NATO's Parliamentary Assembly in Madrid, Mr. Zelensky says, "All nations in our community are interested in not having any dangerous incidents at our nuclear facilities. We all need guaranteed protection from any Russian missiles and Russian sabotage at nuclear facilities." The Zaporizhzhia plant in southern Ukraine was shelled on Saturday and Sunday, raising concerns about the potential for a serious accident just 500 kilometers from Chernobyl, site of the world's worst nuclear disaster in 1986. Russia said earlier on Monday that Zaporizhzhia's shelling could unleash a grave nuclear accident, repeating its accusations that Ukrainian forces were to blame. Now, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock says the country and its European allies will stand by Moldova this winter and will not allow Russian President Vladimir Putin to bring the country to its knees. Speaking to reporters at a donor conference for Moldova in Paris, Baerbock says, quote, "We will not leave Moldova alone in the cold, in darkness, or in a looming recession," pledging some 30 million euros in additional support beyond the 90 million that Germany has already made available this year. She adds that we will continue to clearly stand with common values against the cold winter of Russian aggression and power politics blowing from the Kremlin. In the meantime, Moldova warned its people to brace up for a harsh winter as it was facing an acute energy crisis which risked stoking popular unrest with Russia's war in Ukraine, threatening its energy supplies and prices surging. About 50 countries and institutions met in Paris on Monday to pledge aid for the country as fears mount it could be further destabilized by the conflict in Ukraine. Moldova, sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania, has felt the effects of the rising energy and food prices and thousands of refugees arriving in the country of about 2.5 million people, which has taken more Ukrainian refugees per head than any other country.
This war is endangering the supply of electricity and gas. We are not certain we can find enough volumes to heat and light our homes. And even if we do, the prices are unaffordable for our people and economy. This could jeopardize our social peace and security. I know everyone in Europe pays a very high price for energy, but these same prices have a much more ruinous impact on our country and people.
In the meantime, now to the retired U.S. General Ben Hodges, who says that cyber attacks on the German ports of Bremerhaven or Hamburg would severely impede NATO efforts to send military enforcement to allies. The European Commission proposed an action plan to bolster cyber defense earlier this month. Hodges, who commanded U.S. Army forces in Europe from 2014 until 2017 and has long argued that civilian infrastructure is an essential pillar of military strategy, said cyber protection is just as important as missile defense systems to guard the German North Sea ports.
There was an incident that happened about 4 years ago. It was a Russian cyber attack called NotPetya that was actually targeting a Ukrainian tax office. And of course, many of your listeners will be familiar how a virus can spread in a lot of directions beyond the original intentional target. And this virus ended up shutting down businesses all around the world or disrupting their efforts. And the one that got my attention was Maersk. Maersk was shut down. The entire company was shut down except for one laptop because they did not have the proper protections. And when they were hit, everywhere that they had a ship that was operating and port terminal operators, the laptops and other communications equipment that they use for managing inventory, what's in that truck, what's in that container, what's on that ship, was all lost. And when I read that story, that's when it really hit me how vulnerable we were, that if Bremerhaven, for example, were shut down by a cyber attack of some sort, just disrupting the inventory of knowing what's in what container and where to put things, that was when I realized how vulnerable we are.
And that's a wider conversation we'll be having on the European effect on the war on the European allies, or axis, if you like, of the Ukrainian and the Russian people. Now we're going to be talking to Mr. Olabode Shomi, an oil and gas expert, joining us from Abuja, our Abuja studios. So welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Much obliged for your presence. Thank you so much. We know that historically speaking, the Russian winter was underestimated by the German forces in World War II. And when Hitler went and invaded Russia, it turned out to be his Waterloo, if you like. How much of a problem will this winter issue affect countries like Moldova and Ukraine, as the Russian forces are obviously targeting the Ukrainian energy facilities? And what can be done?
Okay, I would like to say a short story to put this in perspective. I lived in Sweden briefly, was not long, and my first trip actually to Scandinavia was to Sweden, and it was in January. And on that particular winter, it was -20. And this is Stockholm now, so we are not talking about the northern Sweden. If you realize the Scandinavian region, they share border with Russia. So Finland, Scandinavia is Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland is about 2 hours from St. Petersburg by road. And St. Petersburg is the second largest city in Russia. Now, I'm putting that in perspective because if you check the weather forecast, a friend of mine sent me a picture yesterday of 5 inches of snow on the ground in Sweden. What basically that means is that as at today, or as at when he sent that picture, there is, you could step your feet into snow, it will be 5 inches and all that. The mainland Europe is not yet experiencing that. So traditionally, historically, and by climate origins, those regions are particularly cold. Now, the implication of that is that to keep yourself warm, as in because human beings are warm-blooded animals, you need an exceedingly higher amount of energy. And in these days, where it is electricity and it is fuel sources that produces energy and no longer wood, it means that they are going to have a lot more amount of energy, a lot more fuel sources to be able to produce the required amount of energy to function normally. So if you realized when the lady from Ukraine, the minister, was saying, he said that, yes, even if they're able to supply the appropriate amount of energy, the cost could be prohibitive to them, and which will in turn affect the economy. So in simple terms, for that region of the world, Northern Europe, Russia axis, you need a much more amount of energy. And if you are not able to produce that energy, that amount of energy within the confines and at the times you need it, it can be an undoing. And that, like you said, when Hitler was within foresight of Moscow, but the winter came in and it turned around the fortunes of the war. So just like everybody else, the Russians, they're used to it, is where they live. They are very close to the North Pole. So it's not, they have a lifestyle over centuries that they know how to adapt to it. It is people who are not as experienced as them in that region that suffer for it. So basically, everybody needs to reassess their position, and that will enable them to look for a way out in terms of the current issues that are at play. That would be my view on this.
And speaking of looking for a way out, we know that these countries who are supporting Ukraine are promising aid, and some of them are making good on those promises. But as far as the energy problems are concerned, is it sustainable what they're promising? And what is an alternative source that can be used in the interim that is a reliable one in the short term, if any at all?
I think by the very definition of sustainability, aid cannot be sustainable, because once it's not part of a system that is producing, self-generating, it is not possible. So aid as a means of sustaining Ukraine is totally out of the table. There are other issues, well, very fundamental issues that need to be looked into. I remember a friend who is within the US Congress analyzed some things to me a few days ago, and he said basically that the amount of money that the US has contributed in terms of aid to Ukraine is more than the total budget of the total defense budget of Russia. But yet Russia is still able to hold significant amounts of the country, and they were able to conduct a referendum without any issue. So in his own views, there could be some congressional hearings that will look into the amounts that has been spent. Well, these are human limitations. It's just to put a context to all the issues, that there is no way aid is going to be sustainable. The only thing that is sustainable is peace. And it is when peace comes in that you will look into the fundamentals of the economic issues, and that is when aid can be a kickstart to the economy. Right now, they are all short stop and short gaps. So at some point, when all the grandstanding has been done, when all the issues have been looked into, the fact of all the protagonists, all the protagonists in the whole game, they need to sit around the table, which they have not done before, and look at a way out. They must sit around the table to determine the way out. And it is on the sitting on the table that will now determine the energy future. As of today, when they talk about the prices going up within oil, fingers are actually pointed to OPEC. And to some extent, that could be true. However, the fundamental factors that is allowing OPEC to have the sway and the influence that they are talking about is the war in Ukraine itself. Without the war, all the other fundamentals that were not in place will come in place, and those things cease to matter. So despite all the fingers that goes to Ukraine, despite all the accusations and all that, without the war between Ukraine and Russia reaching a stabilizing point, we are still going to be continually experiencing increases within the crude oil prices.
It's interesting that you bring up OPEC, because I brought that up yesterday. And do you think that they have to strike a delicate balance between protecting their own interests? That's what OPEC is. It's there to protect their own interests, and also not be seen to be supporting Russia inadvertently in any way.
It is not the responsibility of OPEC to protect interests outside their own. I mean, that's why they're set up anyway. They are called the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So with a status, with bylaws to protect the interest of their members. So if you want OPEC to protect your interest, you get to be a part of OPEC. If you want the EU to protect your interest, you get to be a part of EU. If you want NATO to protect your interest, you get to be a part of NATO. So you cannot expect, I mean, I don't see the rationale, the logic behind expecting OPEC to protect the interest of those outside their own circle. But having said that, OPEC does not exist in isolation. It is not insular. It exists in a society, in a global geopolitical dynamics within the energy space. So they have to allow their interest to be politically sensitive. I mean, to use the word of the words Donald Trump have made very popular, to be politically correct. So they cannot be seen to be antagonizing forces that are much stronger than themselves. But in reality, it is not their place to protect the interest of others. I mean, it is business. It is the fundamentals of economics. It is the free market enterprise. Why should I push for forces that will be at my detriment? The interest of OPEC is to ensure that there is quality pricing for its members. Why should they go against what is in the interest of their members? I mean, these are just pure logic. So there are forces at play. Everybody should take responsibility in terms of what is their places. And I believe that at the end of the day, we should have a more profitable oil and gas industry and a better a better global economy at the end of it, where everybody will have learned a thing or two.
You spoke about peace. I think that's a bit far down the horizon, but we hope that it draws nearer. Thank you so much, Mr. Olabode Shomi, oil and gas expert, for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
After the break, saving power. Ukraine imposes additional power outages due to plummeting temperatures. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Europe is waking up to a new need to defend itself since Russia did invade Ukraine. Russia has recently increasingly targeted communications and electricity infrastructure in Ukraine, and in October warned that quasi-civilian infrastructure may be a legitimate target for retaliatory strike against countries aiding the Eastern European country, which it invaded in February.
Of their first.
It's well documented. The fact that when you go from Poland into Lithuania, you still have to change to a different gauge because the Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are still on the old Russian gauge rail, as is Ukraine and Georgia. So this adds additional steps. We have learned from Russia's war against Ukraine is we've been reminded actually that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. We do not have enough transport capacity or infrastructure that enables the rapid movement of NATO forces across Europe. The Deutsche Bahn, which all of us depend on, specifically DB Cargo, has enough rail cars to move 1.5 armored brigades simultaneously at one time. We've also discovered through exercises over the last few years that the further east you go, it becomes more difficult because the infrastructure is not as robust or redundant. The bridges that can hold a modern Abrams tank or Leopard or a British Challenger, not many bridges can sustain that sort of weight. I think there is a heightened sense of urgency because of, we've all been awakened now by the threat of what Russia is doing. And this is not an academic thing or just a debating topic now. That this is real. So I actually am optimistic. I would like to see us having moved a lot faster.
And now for another perspective of the business kind concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have our business correspondent, Laddie Williams, to talk with us. Laddie, it's good to see you again this morning.
Good to see you again. Good morning.
Now, I'm thinking that Russia has become like a European honey badger, very hardy, seeming to find a way out as far as these sanctions imposed are concerned. Because you've mentioned here that discounts have lifted Russia's fertilizer exports and becomes a top supplier to India.
Yeah, just as we see the two buddies now talking about Russia and India, we've seen their trade skyrocket this year. And for the first time, we're seeing Russia being a top exporter of fertilizer to India. It's the first time this is happening, and obviously it's because of the discounts. We've seen how, Russia has been able to sell, most of their products there cheaper than what you get in the market, and this is all because of the sanctions. So many countries are not buying, from Russia at this time. So the ones that they're able to sell to, we're seeing them actually sell cheaper. That's why we saw the U.S. actually come out with that extra sanction, against Russia, making sure that they're not able to sell, some of their products below fair price. We saw them do that, but other countries have not, followed suit to that. So we're seeing, India still benefiting from cheap oil, from Russia. Now they're also getting cheap fertilizer. So at the end of the day, India is making a killing here, getting all of these items at lower than market rate.
So cheaper fertilizer means greater volume of export.
Yes, to India. That's from Russia. Because we're seeing India demand more because they're getting cheaper from. It's business at the end of the day. Other sources are selling at higher prices, but they're getting. But Russia is selling at as a discount that they cannot refuse. So we've seen you know, sales.
It's like a Black Friday sale.
Exactly.
Everything must go.
Exactly. And we've seen their sale to India up about 300% in the first 6 months of this year. And it just goes to show that India is enjoying this sale, and they are pursuing it, you know, more and more, and getting all of that cheap, you know, fertilizer out of Russia.
Russian firms cut forex loans exposure in October.
Yeah, so at the end we're seeing how, you know, central bankers globally are raising rates, you know, making it more expensive for, you know, businesses and even countries to borrow, you know, at this time, because everyone's trying to mop up that excess liquidity in the country. So we're seeing, you know, Russian companies now try to cut their exposure, you know, to foreign loans, because by the time you take those loans, maybe in dollars, you know, you're paying more, because we saw the dollar actually hit an all-time high this year, even though, you know, the dollar has pulled back a bit, but it looks like it's starting to rise again, because the Fed is looking like they're going to be hawkish again at their next meeting. They're going to raise rates again, and we know how, you know, investors run to safety. That's the greenback once there is a rate hike. So the next meeting coming in December, investors are already expecting another hike, and we're already seeing the dollar, you know, starting to inch up, you know, gradually. So we're seeing those Russian, you know, companies try to reduce their exposure in foreign currency, you know, so that they don't take on too much interest.
I'm surprised they're even still in the market and trading and everything.
Oh yeah, there's still a couple of them still able to access that market, but we know the sanctions are biting hard. They're not able to, you know, get some of those critical imports, you know, that they need for production in the country. So, but some companies are still able to get some of these loans, but they're still cutting back, you know, at this time, because it's getting really expensive to borrow in foreign currency.
And finally, Ladi, oil markets and how the prices?
Oh yeah, oil market, still that volatility we're seeing, you know, in the market. Yesterday we heard about the COVID cases in China rising again, and obviously the biggest importer, you know, cutting back demand is obviously impacting prices. But now we're seeing the prices inch up this morning, because there are signs that OPEC might actually be cutting, you know, output production by about 500,000 barrels per day.
Yes.
So we're seeing investors, you know, anticipating that, you know, looking out for that. So obviously we're seeing the prices inch up, because a reduced supply, you know, to the market, that gets the price higher. And we also see that by December, you know, they're supposed to cap Russian oil.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Russia, they said they're not going to sell their oil to any country that's putting a cap on their price. So again, that's taking out output from the market, making it harder to get oil, and obviously we'll get a rise in prices. So we're seeing some, you know, analysts predicting that we might cross $100 per barrel again for Brent and, you know, WTI. But, you know, we're watching that market. There's a lot of volatility in there. It remains to be seen what happens if OPEC actually cuts down by 500,000 barrels. Then today we're having our final MPC meeting. That's the Central Bank of Nigeria. They're having their final, you know, rate setting meeting today. We're going to be covering that by 1:30 on Business Incorporated. So
our viewers should stay tuned for that,
so
all around the world. So
we might see another jumbo hike, you know, from the central bank here, because they're still trying to tame inflation. Inflation is still high, about 21.09%. So we're all looking out for that. We're going to have analysis on all of that.
When oil prices go up, it favors Russia ostensibly.
Yeah, it favors Russia.
And OPEC has a responsibility, as I put to our earlier guest, to protect itself, because that's why it was established.
Exactly.
So as it's protecting itself, trying to drive up those prices, Russia gets
so Russia, at the end of the day, is supposed to get a cap, you know, on their prices. And they're saying if any country that puts a cap on their oil, they're not going to sell to you. So they're going to take their business, you know, elsewhere. And obviously that's going to impact, you know, on prices, because that already tells you that Russia's oil will not be in the market like it used to be, you know, because they don't want to, Putin doesn't want to hear about an oil price cap. Because I know they were seeing how the U.S. and its allies are trying to, you know, stop that war machine, from Russia, stop, the funds from getting to Russia. And it's not easy because at the end of the day, you're trying to stop the war machine, but at the same time, you're pulling out output, into the market, which is going to drive up prices. So it's a tough mix we're seeing, for that oil market.
Okay, Laddie, thank you so much. We're going to see much more of business news on Business Morning after this program at the top of the hour.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Laddie.
All right.
Now, on the aftermath of the Russian missile strike on a village in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region, homes were destroyed in that attack. For one local resident, who is Ihor Shkavarets, his house on the village some 30 kilometers north of the front line was one of those reduced to rubble. He said he and his wife and his mother-in-law were at home when an explosion rocked the building in the middle of the night. The 54-year-old says the three men were trapped by debris and he helped rescue his mother-in-law from under the rubble before struggling back to switch off the gas supply. His house was left with shattered doors, drawers, windows, massive crater next to it. Locals helped him to clear away the rubble throughout the morning. Ukrainian energy suppliers have imposed additional blackouts starting yesterday in addition to scheduled ones as temperatures across the country plummet. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the blackouts are due to a higher level of demand for electricity than the country's war-damaged infrastructure can provide. During a daily address to the nation, the president appealed to regional and local authorities to double down on the message to residents to consume electricity. Temperatures in Kyiv are expected to hover around 0 Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that is, for at least the next 10 days. Yasno, Ukraine's biggest energy supplier, said emergency outages affected almost 1 million households and businesses. The CEO of Yasno says engineers are working to restore power before even further cold weather sets in, but warned that Ukrainians will likely have to live with outages until at least the end of March. The best-case scenario, barring new attacks on the grid, is that power shortages could be evenly distributed throughout the country, it said in a post on the company's Facebook page. Now, in the event of a severe damage to the grid by Russian attacks, he warns people can expect not only hourly stabilization power outages, but also emergency ones when there may be no light for a very long time. He urges the Ukrainian citizens to be prepared for the worst-case scenario and to stock up on warm clothes, blankets, and supplies in case of long blackouts. Residents of southern Ukrainian city of Kherson are to be evacuated to other regions of the country with working electricity and more intact infrastructure for the winter, specifically women and children, the elderly, and other vulnerable people. The Black Sea port city, which was recently liberated from Russian troops, is without electricity. And authorities say the city's infrastructure has been too damaged for citizens to survive winter. The Vice Prime Minister for the Minister of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories says Ukraine will offer free evacuation to citizens of Kherson and with possible further relocation to western regions of Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities will offer free accommodation, food, and medical attention to those who would want to leave. We'll now be speaking with Dr. Olena Sneger, who is an expert at the Entree for Global Studies Strategy Ukraine. She speaks to us via Zoom from Florence, where she's attending the German-Polish Roundtable. You're welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Hello.
It's good to have you. Let's begin with the reactions of the power companies to the outages in Ukraine. I will recall what an official from DTEC says. He went as far as to say that if any more evacuations can happen, or if any more people can leave Ukraine, they should leave. He went as far as to say something as extreme as that, because the capacity to keep the power going has been drastically limited by the attacks on the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable suggestion from the officials of the DTEC, and also Ukrainian officials also, as well ask people, to those who can leave the big cities, and to move elsewhere or even abroad to spend this winter somewhere in a less risky place, in a less dangerous place, to do it, especially for families and with children and elderly people. Because, Ukrainian engineers, they renew, they repair the infrastructure damaged by Russians, but we expect, it looks like Russia is gathering forces for some time, like rockets, buying rockets from other countries also, and then plans another severe attack on energy infrastructure of Ukraine. And last time we also saw that it was so close to Polish border that also went over the border, and some rockets has fallen on the Polish territory. So we expect these attacks to continue, and we expect that it can be much more worse than it is today. And we have to remember that we have nuclear power plants at the territory of Ukraine, and that's also pretty dangerous. So we resist, but the society, the inhabitants, the Ukrainians who can leave, it's better for them to leave the cities, the big cities.
Dr. Olena, what do you think of what's happening concerning the nuclear power plants, to which you've drawn our attention again? Now, Russia says they're not the ones that are shelling the power plant. They are holding the power plant. It's under their power right now. Ukraine says the Russians are the ones shelling the power plants that the Russians themselves have captured. Who do you believe? And do they even know what they're doing? Because we all remember Chernobyl and what happened. Do you think there might be other powers at play here? Maybe mercenaries or people who are outside the control of the Ukrainian authorities? Because what possible good can Ukraine have to shell a nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, in its own country, and possibly cause a nuclear disaster?
Well, first, I would say that there are no mercenaries from Ukrainian side. All forces that are fighting on Ukrainian side are in the legal framework of Ukrainian military forces. Also, those foreign soldiers, they are like in the regiments of Ukrainian military forces, official Ukrainian army. So there are no mercenaries. We do not involve any mercenaries, and the situation is really controlled from the Ukrainian side and it is also very transparent and very open. We, as you can see, you can have all the information and all the access to the front line of journalists and also of the officials from International Atomic Organization. And they observe, they are constantly present on the Ukrainian objects, and they observe the situation, and they systematically give their reports. So I believe, and also taking into account that Russians lied so much in the past, and that all that they have said before, it appeared to be a lie. So I believe in this situation that these shellings were again the provocation from the Russian side, and Russia is using nuclear weapon in this conflict already. It's a nuclear terror using the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe as a leverage in this war. If something happens on this nuclear power plant, it really would be a European level catastrophe, and the catastrophe also that can hurt, can damage other continents and other countries, not only in Europe. So Russia definitely uses this factor as a leverage. Its forces are present there. They have put there some military equipment. They disagree to withdraw forces from there and to establish a free and security free of militaries and security zone and around this power plant. So Ukraine also proposed some international observers to be there and to create such a security zone around this power plant, but Russia refused to do it. So for me, it's obviously who is interested in destabilizing this power plant and using it as a leverage in this war.
To be a real disaster. I remember the saying that came about as a result of the terrible fighting that happened in Poland, in Warsaw, and it became known that war never saw war until war saw Warsaw. And you are at the German-Polish roundtable right now. Are you hearing anything about the German and Polish position on the war in Ukraine? What's the position of the German and Polish authorities?
Well, I have been at the German-Polish roundtable in Wrocław last week. Right now, I'm back to Firenze, to Florence in Italy, where I'm at the European University Institute as a researcher, work as a researcher. Okay. So about German-Polish position, Germany and Poland are really united now and are really concerned about this Russian war against Ukraine, and they put all their efforts to help Ukraine to resist. So the first issue is a winter of solidarity to help Ukraine to resist and to survive this winter, to help Ukrainian people. And the second issue is to convince Russia to make this war very costly for Russia, to help Ukraine with armament and to make this war very costly for Russia to change the decision of Kremlin. But, well, everyone agrees also that it's almost impossible, so that the only way is not to finance, not to give money to Russian budget, not to make Kremlin unable to finance this war. But it's also a matter of greater consensus globally among G19, I would say also, because I do not consider Russia as a legitimate member of G12 or G20. So but yeah, Poland and Germany, they're really, really concerned, and they're looking how to increase the efforts today.
Dr. Olena, in the mix of reporting about the war since it started up till this point, which Russia calls a special military operation, which is an invasion, there's something that tends to be lost. Maybe not lost, but maybe not as often reported because of the day-to-day activities that are going on. And that's the psychological impact of the war on the women and children in Ukraine. What are you hearing, if anything, of how the Ukrainian people are helping their people to get through this time, for those who could not leave the country and who are in those areas and who are in the country and hear the drums of war resounding over and over?
Yeah, it's a very interesting issue that you have raised. Thank you very much. I recently listened to a report of Ukrainian sociologists who presented the results of the work of a sociological group, especially on this issue, because we have up to 5 or 7 millions of people who left the country already, and most of them are women and children. The biggest number of them are women and children, of course. And so the sociologists, they noticed a few major points, that the behavior of solidarity, behavior of support and help has become a marker of identity of Ukrainians today. So Ukrainians really, on civil level, on civil society level, Ukrainians reacted much faster than on official level. The same, by the way, can be said about Polish society and about society in other European countries which accepted Ukrainian refugees. So the volunteers on the civil society level have reacted much faster than official level, and it helped much people. So in Ukraine, we have to remember that we have during the war has started not on the February 24th. The war has started 8 years ago in 2014 when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, tried to annex Crimea, and invaded eastern territories of Ukraine. So already then we had up to 3 million displaced people, and many of these people lost everything that they have built again the second time. It is terrible impact, of course, on them, but also many of these people found themselves and started volunteering, helping other people. At the first moment, from the first time when it was needed, really needed. So yeah, this maybe this kind of behavior solidarity and behavioral help is helping Ukrainians to overcome this trauma, which is really heavy right now. And it is to be like this sociological, not social, psychological impact is to be studied in future. But yeah, definitely we observe and we experience, and me myself also, because I left Ukraine as a refugee in February. In early March, and I also have these feelings, this trauma inside me. So it is to be studied in future, but definitely this huge social, like common collective trauma of the society, it can be, but I believe that it can be overcome. And it also can be used as a starting point, as something that gives you force if you overcome it. It gives you force and strength if you overcome it in future.
We certainly empathize with you as you had to depart your country and all those that had to do that as well. And we hope for a speedy end to this war. Thank you so much, Dr. Olena Snyga, who is an expert at the Center for Global Studies Strategy Ukraine. Thank you for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you very much.
When we return, donuts and coffee, crunchy dream. Welcomes Russian customers after Krispy Kreme exit. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA, Director General Veronika Loginova has called on the World Anti-Doping Agency to make a non-politicized decision when it begins an assessment of whether Russia should be re-accredited next month. Now, it was deemed non-compliant, that's the agency, with the World Anti-Doping Code because of attempts to cover up a state-sponsored doping operation. But the current sanctions expire on December the 17th. The sanctions include a ban on Russia's name, flag, and anthem at major events, and have prohibited Russia from staging on winning the right to host world championships. Loginova indicated that the RUSADA has faced further difficulty since the imposition of international sanctions against Russia following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The process to reinstatement is set to involve 3 stages, beginning with an assessment by WADA management. The Ukrainian Shooting Federation, the USF President Oleg Volkov has called on the International Olympic Committee to prevent Russian oligarch Vladimir Lysin from standing for re-election as president of the International Shooting Sport Federation. Volkov has claimed in a letter sent to IOC President Thomas Bach that steel manufactured by Lysin's company are used to conduct military operations on the territory of Ukraine and to kill Ukrainians. Last month, American Congressman Steve Cohen, co-chair of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, demanded that the U.S. impose sanctions on Lysin because of his links to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Volkov has now written to Bach to ask him to ban Lysin from standing in the ISSF election at the Congress due to be held in Egyptian resort Sharm el-Sheikh on November the 30th. Volkov blames Lysin for being involved in the death and destruction caused in Ukraine. Finally, if you can find a silver lining, or on a lighter note, Russians craving a donut fix can now visit Crunchy Dream, a string of new cafes opening where U.S. chain Krispy Kreme Incorporated shops once stood as the latest imitation Western brand hits Russian streets. Soon after Russia launched what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine, Krispy Kreme suspended all shipments of donut-making supplies and ingredients to Russia and ended the agreement with its lone Russian franchise. The U.S. chain was one of scores of Western firms to leave the country, and other apparent imitations have since sprung up in Russian cities, with Stars Coffee running coffee shops, formerly owned by Starbucks Corp, and World of Cubes, filling the void left by Danish toymaker Lego. A company owned by restaurateur Arkady Novikov, Krispy Kreme's former franchise partner, applied to register the Crunchy Dream trademark in late September. Novikov Group and Krispy Kreme did not immediately respond to requests for comments. In a financial results statement in August, Krispy Kreme said it had closed 30 franchise shops in Russia. And that's the way the cookie crumbles. And that's it on our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine today. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay, in for your host, Ladia Kedoloale. Do have a great rest of your week and see you again.